Welcome back to Stack Lessons. 20 questions today, focused on IAM security, CloudTrail and Config, and DynamoDB and MemoryDB. 10 seconds per question on the timer, but pause whenever you want. Let's go. Time for another one. Question 1. Look for the constraint that matters. Litware Gaming is building a real-time leaderboard for a mobile game with 8 million active daily users. The system must support millions of read and write operations per second with consistent single-digit millisecond latency. Each record stores a unique player identifier as the lookup key, a score value, and a timestamp. The data model requires no joins, foreign keys, or complex relational queries. Which AWS database service best meets these requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. DynamoDB is built for exactly this access pattern. Amazon DynamoDB is a fully managed NoSQL key value and document database built for applications requiring single-digit millisecond latency at any scale. DynamoDB on-demand capacity mode automatically scales to accommodate millions of requests per second without capacity planning. It is purpose-built for simple key value access patterns, such as the player ID lookups described in this scenario. Amazon RDS for MySQL in a multi-as configuration provides high availability for relational workloads, but is not designed to handle millions of write operations per second. Vertical scaling has hard limits, and the relational model adds unnecessary overhead for simple key value access. Amazon Aurora with read replicas improves read throughput for relational workloads, but still uses a relational engine not optimized for millions of simple key value writes per second at single-digit millisecond latency. Amazon Redshift is a data warehousing service optimized for analytical queries over large historical datasets using columnar storage. It is not designed for high-throughput transactional read/write operations with millisecond latency requirements. Ready. Question 2. Several choices sound plausible. A startup is setting up a new AWS account for the first time. The security team is establishing IAM access controls and wants to follow AWS best practices for securing the root user and enabling daily administration. Which two actions should the security team perform immediately? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option B and option C. Root access keys look useful but are never safe. Enabling multi-factor authentication on the root user is the first critical security action AWS recommends, providing an additional authentication factor to protect the account's highest privilege credentials. Creating a dedicated IAM user with administrative permissions ensures daily operations are performed under an identity that can be monitored, restricted, and revoked independently of the root user. Creating access keys for the root user violates AWS best practices because root credentials should never be used programmatically. Any compromise of those keys grants unrestricted account access. Sharing root credentials with any individual eliminates individual accountability and greatly amplifies the blast radius of a credential compromise. The root user cannot be deleted because it is permanently tied to the AWS account itself. Ready? Question 3. Do not answer a different question. A startup CTO is presenting the financial case for migrating from a private on-premises data center to AWS. She explains that the company will stop purchasing physical servers that must be depreciated over 5-year cycles, and instead pay only for the compute capacity consumed each month, with no upfront investment. Which AWS cloud economics principle does this migration represent? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. The phrase capital expenditure is doing all the work. Trading capital expenditure for variable operational expenditure is the foundational financial model shift that cloud computing provides. On-premises infrastructure requires large upfront capital investments in hardware that are depreciated over time regardless of utilization. AWS converts this fixed cost into a pay-per-use operational cost that scales with actual business activity, improving cash flow and reducing financial risk from idle infrastructure. Economies of scale refers to AWS reducing per-unit infrastructure costs through aggregate purchasing across millions of customers. These savings are passed through as lower prices, but this describes a supply-side cost advantage rather than the customer's financial model shift described in the scenario. Elasticity is the technical capability to automatically scale resources up and down based on demand, not a financial model principle. Fault tolerance describes system design patterns that eliminate downtime, not the economics of cloud adoption. Let us switch gears. Question 4. Keep the constraints in view. Northwind Bank's Security Operations Center wants a service that continuously monitors AWS CloudTrail logs, VPC flow logs, and DNS query logs to identify active threats such as EC2 instances communicating with known malware command and control servers, API calls, originating from impossible geographic locations within a short time window, and potential cryptocurrency mining activity. The solution must require minimal configuration and must not require agents, network probes, or any changes to application infrastructure. Which AWS service should the team enable? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. 3 specific threat signals name the service for you. Amazon Guard Duty is a fully managed threat detection service that continuously analyzes CloudTrail management events, S3 data events, VPC flow logs, and DNS query logs using machine learning, anomaly detection, and integrated threat intelligence feeds. It identifies active security threats such as compromised EC2 instances, reconnaissance activities, cryptocurrency mining, and credential exfiltration, all without requiring agents, sensors, or changes to network configuration. Guard Duty introduces zero performance impact on workloads because it analyzes log data independently of application traffic. AWS Security Hub aggregates and normalizes security findings from Guard Duty and other services into a centralized dashboard, but does not itself perform behavioral threat detection against raw log sources. Amazon Inspector performs automated vulnerability assessments by scanning EC2 instances and container images for known software vulnerabilities and unintended network exposure. It identifies configuration weaknesses rather than detecting active in-flight threats in log streams. AWS Config records resource configuration changes and evaluates them against compliance rules to detect configuration drift, but it does not analyze network traffic logs or API call patterns for active threat indicators. Let us switch gears. Question 5. Test each option against the full ask. A startup is building an e-commerce order processing system. When a customer places an order, 3 completely independent downstream services must each receive a copy of the order event simultaneously: an inventory reservation service, a shipping label generation service, and an accounting ledger service. Each service must process every order event independently in its own workflow without competing for messages. Which AWS service is best suited for this fan-out messaging pattern? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. SQS looks right until you hit the competition problem. Amazon SNS is a fully managed publish-subscribe messaging service built for fan-out scenarios where a single event must be delivered to multiple subscribers simultaneously and independently. When an order event is published to an SNS topic, all 3 subscribed services, inventory, shipping, and accounting, each receive their own copy of the message in parallel. Processing by one service has no effect on the other service's delivery. Amazon SQS with a single shared queue does not support fan-out delivery. Each message in an SQS queue is consumed by exactly one consumer. The first service to receive a message removes it from the queue, preventing the other two services from ever seeing it. For SQS-based fan-out, a separate queue per downstream service would need to be combined with an SNS topic, commonly called the SNS to SQS fan-out pattern. AWS Step Functions is a workflow orchestration service for defining sequential or branching state machine executions. It coordinates the steps of a single workflow rather than independently notifying multiple external service consumers of a shared event. Amazon Kinesis Data Streams is designed for high-throughput ingestion and real-time processing of streaming data at scale. It is suited for analytics pipelines and large volumes of telemetry data, not transactional event notification to a small number of application services. Let's break this one down. The fan-out pattern is a common trap, and it's worth nailing. Imagine you print one work order and post it on a shared board. If 3 teams all need it, but the first person who grabs it removes it, 2 teams get nothing. That's a shared SQS queue. One consumer wins, the others see nothing. SNS, Amazon's notification broadcast service, works differently. You publish one event to an SNS topic. All 3 subscribers, inventory, shipping, accounting, each get their own copy instantly. They never compete. Step Functions is a workflow engine. It scripts steps inside one process, not a broadcast. When one event must reach several services simultaneously, SNS wins. First 5 locked in DynamoDB for key value at any scale, root account lockdown via MFA, the cap X to op X shift, guard duty as agentless threat detection, and SNS as the true fan-out engine. Keep your focus here. Question 6. Do not reward the familiar term. A security consultant reviewing Northwind Core's AWS environment identifies several IAM configuration gaps. Which 2 actions align with AWS IAM best practices and should be implemented immediately to improve the security posture? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option C and option D. MFA plus least privilege are the 2 IAM pillars. Enabling MFA for IAM users adds a second authentication factor beyond passwords. Even if a password is compromised through phishing or credential stuffing, an attacker cannot access the account without the second factor. AWS recommends enabling MFA for all users, with particular urgency for accounts with console access or elevated permissions. Applying the principle of least privilege means each identity receives only the permissions required for its specific job function and no more. Unused permissions are an attack surface. If an account is compromised, the blast radius is limited to what that account was authorized to do. Creating programmatic access keys for the root account violates a fundamental AWS security rule. The root user has unrestricted access to all account resources. AWS recommends never creating root access keys and instead using IAM users or roles for all programmatic access. Attaching policies directly to individual users rather than groups creates an unmanageable permissions model at scale and makes it easy to grant inconsistent permissions. AWS recommends managing permissions through groups and roles. Embedding credentials in source code is a critical security vulnerability. Code repositories, logs, and build artifacts can expose credentials to unauthorized parties. IAM roles and instance profiles provide credential-free authentication for applications running on AWS. Keep your focus here. Question 7. A Datum Corporation currently runs an on-premises customer relationship management system that requires 3 dedicated administrators for patching, maintenance, and upgrades. The CTO wants to eliminate the operational overhead of the self-managed system and gain equivalent CRM functionality. After evaluation, leadership decides to discontinue the on-premises system and begin licensing a cloud-hosted CRM product from a third-party software vendor. Which of the 7 rupees migration strategies does this decision represent? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Drop and shop. That phrase locks in the answer. Repurchase, also known as drop and shop, means switching from a self-managed or on-premises application to a commercially available SaaS-based alternative from a third-party vendor. A datum is abandoning the self-managed CRM and purchasing an equivalent SaaS product, which is the defining characteristic of the repurchase strategy. Rehost, commonly called lift and shift, moves the application to cloud infrastructure with no changes to the application code or architecture. Re-platform makes targeted, limited optimizations, such as migrating a self-managed database to Amazon RDS, without changing the core application. Refactor, or re-architect, involves rebuilding the application from the ground up using cloud-native patterns such as microservices or serverless. All right. Question 8. Check the condition before the service. A developer at Van Arsdale Limited is building an application running on Amazon EC2 that needs to read objects from Amazon S3 and publish messages to Amazon SNS. The security team has a strict policy prohibiting AWS credentials from being stored in application code, configuration files, or environment variables. What is the recommended approach to grant the application the necessary permissions? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Long-term keys in Secrets Manager still carry expiry risk. Attaching an IAM role to the EC2 instance profile is the AWS recommended approach for granting AWS service permissions to applications running on EC2. When an IAM role is assigned to an instance, the AWS SDK automatically retrieves short-lived temporary security credentials from the EC2 instance metadata service. These credentials rotate automatically and are never stored in code, configuration files, or environment variables, fully satisfying the security policy requirement. The application code accesses credentials transparently through the SDK without any manual credential management. Creating an IAM user with long-term access keys introduces risk even when stored in Secrets Manager, because long-term credentials persist until explicitly rotated or deleted and can be exfiltrated if Secrets Manager access is misconfigured. IAM roles with automatically rotating temporary credentials eliminate this risk and are the preferred approach. IAM groups are collections of IAM users and define permissions that apply to those users. Groups cannot be associated with EC2 instances or any AWS service, only IAM roles can be attached to instance profiles. Using root account credentials violates the principle of least privilege and represents one of the most serious security risks in AWS. The root user has unrestricted access to all account resources and should never be used for application-level service access. All right, let's look at question 9. Quick check. A global media streaming company wants to deliver high-definition video content to viewers across 60 countries with the lowest possible latency. Rather than routing every user request to its primary origin server in US East 1, the company wants requests to be served from cached content at AWS infrastructure points distributed worldwide and geographically close to each viewer. Which AWS infrastructure component enables this content caching and delivery capability? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Edge locations and CloudFront are the same CDN concept. Amazon CloudFront is AWS's content delivery network, which uses a global network of edge locations, points of presence distributed across hundreds of cities worldwide, to cache and serve content close to end users. When a viewer requests video content, CloudFront routes the request to the nearest edge location where the content is served from cache if available, dramatically reducing latency compared to serving every request from a central origin. AWS availability zones are isolated data centers within a single AWS region used to provide fault isolation and high availability within that region. They are not distributed globally for content delivery purposes. AWS Direct Connect locations are physical colocation facilities where customers establish dedicated private network connections between their on-premises data centers and AWS. They provide network connectivity, not content caching or delivery acceleration. AWS local zones extend AWS compute, storage, and database services to metropolitan areas closer to specific user populations, but they are designed for running latency-sensitive compute workloads, such as real-time gaming or video editing, not for caching and serving CDN content to a global audience of viewers. Okay. Question 10. The verb matters here. A Datum Corporation's compliance team must provide auditors with evidence that a production Amazon S3 buckets access policy has not been modified at any point during the previous 6 months. Which AWS service provides a timeline of resource configuration changes that can satisfy this audit requirement? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Timeline of configuration changes belongs to Config, not CloudTrail. AWS Config records the configuration state of AWS resources over time and maintains a configuration timeline that shows exactly when and how resource configurations changed. For compliance use cases, AWS Config can demonstrate that an S3 bucket policy remained unchanged over a 6-month period by presenting a continuous configuration history with no modification events recorded. Amazon CloudWatch monitors operational metrics and creates alarms based on thresholds, but does not track resource configuration history. AWS CloudTrail records API calls and events. It would capture a change event if a modification occurred, but AWS Config specifically tracks configuration state snapshots and compliance history across time, making it the purpose-built tool for this audit scenario. Amazon Guard Duty performs threat detection by analyzing logs for suspicious activity, but does not maintain configuration history for compliance audit purposes. Let's slow down here. CloudTrail and Config look similar, but they answer very different questions. Imagine your auditor slides a form across the desk. Prove this S3 buckets access policy hasn't changed in 6 months. Two services look like they could help: CloudTrail and AWS Config. Here's the split. CloudTrail records API calls, who did what, and when. So if someone changed the bucket policy in April, CloudTrail caught that event. But if nothing happened, you're hunting through logs for an absence of evidence. That's a tough thing to hand an auditor. AWS Config works differently. It takes configuration snapshots over time. You can pull up December 1st and June 28th and show the policy was identical. That's the audit-ready timeline the question wants. Questions 6 through 10 reinforced IAM least privilege, the repurchase drop-and-shop migration, EC2 instance profiles over hard-coded credentials, CloudFront edge caching, and Config for configuration state timelines. Okay. Question 11 is up. Trey Research has spent the past decade purchasing physical servers, networking equipment, and storage arrays. These capital commitments required multi-year budget cycles and large upfront investments regardless of actual system utilization. The company is now migrating all workloads to AWS. Which statement most accurately describes the financial model shift that results from this migration? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Option B claims AWS eliminates all IT spending. It doesn't. Migrating to AWS converts capital expenditure into operational expenditure. On-premises infrastructure requires large upfront investments in hardware and facilities regardless of utilization, creating fixed costs and multi-year depreciation cycles. AWS charges only for resources consumed, making costs variable and directly aligned with actual usage. This reduces financial risk, improves cash flow flexibility, and eliminates stranded capacity. AWS does not eliminate IT spending. Customers still pay for consumed cloud services. AWS's economies of scale lower its own per-unit infrastructure costs, which are partially reflected in competitive pricing, but do not remove customer charges. AWS does not require upfront capital commitments for standard consumption-based services. Reserved instances and savings plans are optional discount mechanisms, not mandatory capital obligations. Here we go. Question 12. Solve the situation, not the keyword. Fabricum's compliance team receives an alert that an Amazon S3 buckets block public access setting was disabled without prior authorization. The team needs to determine exactly which IAM user or role made the change and at what time the change occurred. Which AWS service provides this information? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Only CloudTrail records who made the API call. AWS CloudTrail records every API call made in an AWS account, capturing the identity of the caller, the time of the request, the source IP address, the specific action performed, and the resources affected. When the block public access setting on an S3 bucket is changed, CloudTrail creates an event log entry that identifies the IAM principal responsible and the exact timestamp, giving the compliance team the audit evidence needed to investigate. Amazon CloudWatch monitors resource performance metrics and operational health and can trigger alarms, but does not record API call attribution or track which identity performed configuration changes. AWS Config continuously monitors resource configuration states and maintains a configuration history that can detect when the public access setting changed, but to identify the specific IAM principal who initiated the API call, CloudTrail is the authoritative audit source. Amazon Guard Duty analyzes CloudTrail events and other data sources to detect suspicious patterns and threats, but it is a threat detection service rather than a direct audit log for tracing specific API calls to individual principals. Next up, question 13. The wrong answers are close. Northwind Media is building a customer service platform with two key capabilities: a chatbot that understands natural language and holds multi-turn conversations with customers to resolve support tickets, and automatic transcription of recorded customer support phone calls for quality assurance review. Which two AWS services should the team use to implement these two capabilities? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option C. Polly produces speech. Comprehend reads text, neither fits. Amazon Lex is a fully managed service for building conversational interfaces that uses natural language understanding to interpret customer intent and automatic speech recognition to support voice input. It powers multi-turn dialogue flows and is the same technology underlying Amazon Alexa, making it the right choice for the customer service chatbot. Amazon Transcribe is a speech-to-text service that automatically converts audio recordings into accurate text transcripts, enabling quality assurance teams to review recorded support call content at scale. Amazon Polly is a text-to-speech service that synthesizes written text into lifelike spoken audio output. It produces voice rather than understanding spoken input or transcribing existing recordings. Amazon Recognition analyzes images and video content for object detection, facial analysis, and scene understanding. It does not process audio streams or build conversational interfaces. Amazon Comprehend performs natural language processing on text documents to extract sentiment, key phrases, entities, and topic classifications, but it does not build interactive chatbot conversation flows or convert audio recordings into text. Here we go. Question 14. Wording first, memory second. Contessa Core's finance team is planning a new data warehouse deployment on AWS, and needs to estimate the total monthly cost before provisioning any resources. They want to model different configurations, varying compute instance types, storage volumes, and data transfer amounts, and generate a shareable link to present cost estimates to stakeholders for budget approval. Which AWS tool should they use? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Before provisioning any resources means you need the calculator. AWS Pricing Calculator is a free, web-based planning tool that allows teams to model AWS workloads and estimate monthly costs before deploying any resources. Users configure specific services, instance types, storage classes, data transfer volumes, and more, and can generate shareable estimate links for stakeholder review and budget approval. It is the correct tool when no AWS usage history exists and the goal is pre-deployment cost modeling. AWS Cost Explorer analyzes historical AWS spending, identifies cost trends, and provides right-sizing recommendations based on actual usage patterns. It cannot estimate costs for resources that have not yet been provisioned. AWS Budgets creates alerts and automated actions based on current or forecasted spending compared to defined thresholds. It is a monitoring and alerting tool for existing accounts, not a pre-deployment estimation tool. AWS Cost and Usage Report delivers detailed billing records at linatum granularity for charges that have already been incurred, and is used for deep retroactive cost analysis, not prospective planning. Now, question 15. Eliminate before you select. Fabricam Incorporated experienced two simultaneous attacks, a volumetric flood of traffic that overwhelmed their public-facing website, and SQL injection attempts through their customer login page. The security team wants to deploy AWS managed services to address both threats. Which TU services should they implement? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option C. 2 attack layers, 2 different services, match them up. AWS Shield protects against distributed denial of service attacks by detecting and automatically mitigating volumetric network and transport layer attacks. Shield Standard is enabled automatically for all AWS accounts. Shield Advanced provides enhanced DDoS protection and access to the AWS DDoS response team for complex attacks. AWS WAF is a web application firewall that filters HTTP and HTTPS requests based on configurable rules, including rules that block SQL injection and cross-site scripting attempts at the application layer. Amazon Guard Duty is a threat detection service that analyzes CloudTrail events, VPC flow logs, and DNS logs for malicious patterns. It identifies threats after the fact rather than blocking active attacks. Amazon Macy discovers and classifies sensitive data such as personally identifiable information stored in S3, and is not designed to block network or application layer attacks. Amazon Inspector scans EC2 instances and container images for software vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, not active web application exploits. Through 15. CloudTrail names the actor behind any API change. Lex builds chatbots while Transcribe converts audio. Pricing Calculator works before you deploy. Shield absorbs floods, WAF filters injections. Now, question 16. Map the qualifier to the answer. A compliance officer at Fabricam Financial is reviewing the company's encryption key management strategy. Regulators require that the company maintain exclusive, dedicated control over the hardware security module used for cryptographic operations, with documented proof that no third-party personnel, including cloud provider employees, can ever access the private keys. Which AWS service satisfies this requirement? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Exclusive dedicated HSM hardware control, only CloudHSM qualifies. AWS CloudHSM provides dedicated, single-tenant hardware security modules that run inside the customer's VPC. The customer initializes the HSM, controls the cryptographic credentials, and is solely responsible for key management. AWS has no visibility into or access to the keys or cryptographic operations performed on the HSM. This makes CloudHSM the only AWS option that satisfies regulatory requirements demanding exclusive customer control over dedicated HSM hardware. AWS KMS uses a shared underlying infrastructure where AWS manages the hardware security modules at the service layer. While customers control their customer-managed keys through IAM policies, the underlying HSM hardware is managed by AWS, which does not satisfy single-tenant hardware control requirements. AWS Certificate Manager manages SSL/TLS certificates for use with AWS services. It is not a general-purpose encryption key management solution. AWS Secrets Manager stores and rotates application secrets such as database passwords and API keys, not HSM-controlled cryptographic keys requiring dedicated hardware isolation. Let's slow down here. This question hides a very specific phrase that locks the answer. Imagine Fabricom's compliance auditor walks in and says, "Show me proof that AWS cannot touch your keys." With KMS, Key Management Service, you can show IAM policies, but the underlying hardware is still shared AWS infrastructure. Not good enough. The question plants three words that lock you in: exclusive, dedicated, and no cloud provider access. CloudHSM puts a physical hardware security module inside your own VPC. Only you initialize it. AWS has zero visibility into it. KMS is multi-tenant. CloudHSM is single-tenant. When regulators say dedicated hardware, they mean single-tenant. That's why CloudHSM wins and KMS fails the hardware isolation test. Let us keep moving. Question 17. Identify the business need first. A security engineer at Litware Technology needs to investigate a potential data exposure incident. They must determine whether an Amazon S3 bucket's permissions were changed from private to public access last Tuesday, identify exactly which IAM user performed the change, and capture the source IP address of the API request. Which AWS service provides this specific information? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Source IP plus caller identity points straight to CloudTrail. AWS CloudTrail records every API call made within an AWS account as a structured event that captures the identity of the caller, IAM user, role, or root account, the timestamp, the source IP address, the specific action performed, and the affected resource. Investigating who changed S3 bucket permissions, when it occurred, and from which IP address is precisely the use case CloudTrail was designed to fulfill. Amazon CloudWatch collects metrics, log data, and events for operational monitoring of resource performance and application health. It does not maintain a record of API call history with requester identity and source IP for access control changes. AWS Config continuously records the configuration state of AWS resources over time, and can confirm that an S3 bucket's ACL or public access block setting changed on a specific date, but it does not capture the requester identity or source IP address at the API call level. The detail is exclusively in CloudTrail. Amazon Inspector performs automated vulnerability assessments against EC2 instances and container images to detect software vulnerabilities and unintended network exposure. It plays no role in auditing API call activity or tracking who modified resource configurations. Let us keep moving. Question 18. Separate fact from assumption. Bellows College is building a real-time leaderboard for an online learning platform that tracks student scores across thousands of concurrent users. the system requires sub-millisecond Redis-compatible read and write performance. After a previous incident where a node failure caused the leaderboard to completely reset, the team now requires that score data survives node failures and remains durable. Which AWS database service should they use? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Elasticache Redis is fast but loses data when nodes fail. Amazon MemoryDB for Redis is a fully durable, in-memory database service that is Redis compatible and specifically designed for workloads requiring both ultra-low latency and data durability. Unlike a cache, MemoryDB persists all data to a multi-as transactional log, so data survives node failures, directly addressing the previous data loss incident. Amazon Elasticache for Redis provides sub-millisecond Redis performance, but is a caching service designed for transient data. When a primary node fails, data that has not yet been replicated to replicas can be lost, making it unsuitable for this durability requirement. Amazon DynamoDB is a serverless NoSQL database offering single-digit millisecond latency, but does not provide native Redis API compatibility or the sub-millisecond in-memory performance this real-time leaderboard requires. Amazon RDS for PostgreSQL is a disk-based relational database and cannot deliver the in-memory, sub-millisecond read and write performance required for thousands of concurrent real-time leaderboard updates. This one caught a lot of people. Elasticache and MemoryDB look identical, but one key difference changes everything. Imagine your leaderboard is handling 10,000 concurrent users and a node suddenly crashes. With Elasticache for Redis, any scores that hadn't replicated yet are just gone. The data evaporates. MemoryDB for Redis solves that exact problem. Both services speak Redis and hit sub-millisecond speeds, but MemoryDB logs every write to a transaction log across multiple data centers before confirming it. So if a node fails, your data survives. Look at the latency bars. Elasticache and MemoryDB are nearly the same. DynamoDB comes in around 5 milliseconds. RDS for PostgreSQL is even slower. The question isn't about speed, it's about durability. Elasticache is a cache. MemoryDB is a database. That's the trap. Time for another one. Question 19. This is a two-step filter. Conteso Core's engineering team is evaluating Amazon DynamoDB for a new high-traffic gaming application. A senior architect makes several claims about DynamoDB during a design review. Which two statements accurately describe Amazon DynamoDB? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option C. Options B and D sound like real database rules. They're not. Amazon DynamoDB is a fully managed NoSQL key value and document database engineered to deliver consistent single-digit millisecond latency at any scale, from a single item lookup to billions of items under heavy concurrent load. This performance characteristic makes DynamoDB well-suited for gaming leaderboards, session stores, shopping carts, and other low-latency, high-throughput workloads. DynamoDB's on-demand capacity mode removes the need to specify read and write capacity units in advance. The service automatically scales throughput up and down to match actual request patterns, making it ideal for applications with variable or unpredictable traffic. DynamoDB is schemaless, meaning items within the same table can have entirely different attributes. A fixed schema is not required and is not enforced. DynamoDB is not designed for complex SQL join operations or large-scale analytical queries. Amazon Redshift or Amazon Athena serve those use cases. DynamoDB automatically replicates data across 3 availability zones within a region by default, providing built-in high availability without any manual replication configuration. DynamoDB shows up constantly on the CLF-C02 exam. Let's nail exactly what it can and can't do. Picture a gaming leaderboard that goes viral overnight, 1 million players hitting it every second. DynamoDB handles that without breaking a sweat. It's a fully managed NoSQL database. That means no SQL, no joins, just fast key-value lookups. It responds in single-digit milliseconds whether you have 10 users or 10 million. In on-demand mode, it scales automatically. You never pre-plan capacity. It's also schemaless, so each player's record can look completely different. Behind the scenes, AWS copies your data across 3 availability zones automatically. The exam traps are the flip side: no schema enforcement, no SQL joins, no manual replication setup needed. Time for another one. Now for question 20. A startup has just deployed its first production workload on AWS and wants to prevent unexpected billing surprises. The finance team wants to automatically receive an email notification when actual monthly AWS costs reach 80% of a $1,000 monthly threshold, and again when they reach 100%. Which AWS service should they configure to meet this requirement? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Budgets alerts, Explorer analyses, calculator plans, CUR records. AWS Budgets allows customers to set custom cost and usage thresholds, and automatically sends alert notifications by email or through Amazon SNS when actual or forecasted spending approaches or exceeds defined amounts. Budgets supports multiple alert thresholds at different percentages of a budget, making it straightforward to configure notifications at both 80% and 100% of the $1,000 monthly limit. This is exactly the proactive cost monitoring and alerting purpose Budgets is designed for. AWS Cost Explorer is an analytical tool for visualizing, understanding, and investigating past and projected AWS spending. It provides usage trends, cost breakdowns by service, and right-sizing recommendations, but does not send threshold-based alerts when active spending approaches a defined limit. AWS Pricing Calculator is a pre-deployment planning tool used to estimate the monthly cost of a planned architecture before any resources are deployed. It models costs based on anticipated usage parameters and cannot monitor live active spending against alert thresholds. AWS Cost and Usage Report provides the most granular billing data available, delivering detailed line item usage and cost records to Amazon S3. It is designed for deep cost analysis and integration with business intelligence platforms, not for configuring real-time spending alerts. 3 takeaways from this session. First, CloudTrail captures who called the API. Config captures what the configuration was, never swap them. Second, EC2 instance profiles inject rotating temporary credentials. Long-term access keys in code always fail IAM best practices. Third, MemoryDB persists every write to a multi as transactional log. Elasticache Redis can lose data on a node failure. Every service we covered has exactly one job. Guard duty detects, CloudTrail attributes, config tracks state, MemoryDB survives failures. Know each service's job and the right answer follows every time. Before you go, if this is helping, subscribing is the best free way to support the channel and grow it. Drop your score in the comments and what tripped you up. Got an exam on your radar I should cover next? Name it below, and if anything about the speed or style could improve, send me your thoughts. I read every one.